What happens when one of television's most respected journalists sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to find himself under attack from the very host who invited him on? In just 30 seconds, a simple question about his career would spiral into an explosive confrontation that left the studio audience gasping and one man walking off set in disgust. This is the story of how Lorraine Kelly, the beloved morning television host, revealed a side of herself that shocked viewers across the nation. And how Piers Morgan, the guest who came prepared to discuss his work, became the unlikely hero who refused to tolerate her increasingly hostile behavior. It started like any other morning on The Lorraine Kelly Show. The set was bright and cheerful, the audience settled into their seats, and the camera crew made their final adjustments. Lorraine sat in her signature chair, flipping through her notes with a smile that seemed just a little too tight. Beside her on the panel were two of her regular contributors, fashion expert Debbie Watson, known for her sharp wit and even sharper critiques, and entertainment correspondent Marcus Hill, who had a reputation for stirring up controversy. Piers Morgan walked onto the set to warm applause from the audience. He was dressed in a crisp navy suit, looking relaxed and ready for what he assumed would be a standard promotional interview. He had a new book coming out, a memoir about his years in journalism, and he thought this would be a perfect opportunity to discuss it with a fellow broadcaster he had known for years. "Piers, welcome to the show," Lorraine said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Thanks for having me, Lorraine," Piers replied, settling into the guest chair. "Always a pleasure." "Is it, though?" Lorraine said, her tone shifting almost immediately. "I mean, is it really a pleasure for you to be here? Or are you just promoting your book?" The audience laughed nervously. Piers chuckled, thinking it was banter. "Well, of course I'm promoting the book. That's what guests do on talk shows, isn't it?" he said, good-naturedly. Lorraine's smile vanished. "I just think it's interesting that you only seem to show up when you have something to sell." The tension in the studio became palpable. Debbie Watson shifted uncomfortably in her seat while Marcus Hill leaned forward, sensing something bigger was about to happen. "I'm not sure what you mean by that," Piers said, his own smile fading. "I've been on this show several times over the years, and not always to promote something." "Name one time," Lorraine shot back. Piers paused, clearly caught off guard by the hostility. "Well, I was here 2 years ago discussing the state of journalism after that phone hacking scandal." "You were promoting your documentary about the phone hacking scandal," Lorraine corrected sharply. "So again, you were selling something." The audience sat in stunned silence. This was not the warm, friendly Lorraine they knew. This was someone else entirely. "Lorraine, I'm not sure why you're being so aggressive," Piers said calmly. "I thought we were friends." "Friends?" Lorraine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Friends don't write entire chapters in their books criticizing other people's careers." Ah, there it was. Piers had indeed written about the state of morning television in his book, and while he had not named Lorraine specifically, he had made some pointed observations about hosts who he felt had become too soft, too focused on celebrity gossip rather than real news. "I didn't mention you by name," Piers said carefully. "You didn't have to," Lorraine snapped. "Everyone knows who you were talking about. Everyone in this industry read that chapter and knew exactly who you meant." Debbie Watson tried to intervene. "Maybe we should talk about the positive aspects of the book, Lorraine. I'm sure there are some lovely stories in there about Piers's career." "Stay out of this, Debbie," Lorraine said without even looking at her. "This is between me and him." Debbie's eyes widened, and she exchanged a shocked glance with Marcus, who looked equally uncomfortable, but also strangely fascinated by the unfolding drama. "With all due respect, Lorraine," Piers said, his voice remaining steady, "I wrote about the industry as a whole. I have observations about the direction television journalism has taken, and yes, I think morning shows have become too fluffy. But that's not a personal attack on you." "Too fluffy," Lorraine repeated, her voice rising. "Too fluffy. I have built a career spanning decades on this show. I have interviewed prime ministers, activists, survivors of tragedies. I have covered serious news stories. And you have the audacity to sit there and call my show fluffy? I didn't call your show anything, Piers countered. You're putting words in my mouth. I'm reading between the lines, Lorraine shouted. The audience gasped. This was unprecedented. Lorraine Kelly, the warm, motherly figure of morning television, was shouting at a guest. Marcus Hill decided to jump in. I actually think Piers makes some interesting points in the book about the evolution of broadcast journalism. I read an early copy, and there's a whole section about how... Nobody asked you, Marcus. Lorraine cut him off coldly. I'm talking to Piers. Marcus sat back, visibly stung by the dismissal. The crew members standing at the edge of the set looked at each other nervously. The director in the control room was frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. You know what your problem is, Piers? Lorraine continued, pointing a finger at him. You think you're better than everyone else. You think because you worked at a national newspaper and had your own primetime show that you can look down on the rest of us who are still working every morning to entertain and inform people. That's not true, Piers said firmly. I have enormous respect for what you've built, Lorraine. I always have. Then why did you write that I'm past my prime? Lorraine demanded. I never wrote that, Piers said, his voice rising now too. I have never, ever written those words about you. Page 147, Lorraine said, grabbing a copy of his book from beside her chair. She flipped it open to a marked page. Right here. You write about hosts who have been on air for so long that they've lost touch with what audiences actually want to see. That's not about you, Piers insisted. It's about people exactly like me, Lorraine fired back. Who else has been on morning television for as long as I have? Who else fits that description perfectly? The audience was completely silent now, watching the confrontation unfold like a car crash they could not look away from. Some people in the front row had their hands over their mouths in shock. Piers took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. Lorraine, I think you're taking this very personally, and I understand that. But you have to understand that as a journalist, I'm going to write about the industry I've spent my entire life in. That includes observations about trends and changes. It's not meant to hurt anyone. But it does hurt, Lorraine said, and for a moment, her voice cracked. Do you have any idea what it's like to read something like that from someone you considered a colleague, a peer, someone you've known for years? There was genuine pain in her voice now, but it was quickly replaced by anger again. And you know what makes it worse? She continued. You didn't even have the decency to call me and warn me it was coming. You just published it and let me find out like everyone else. I didn't think I needed to warn anyone, Piers said. It's a book about my observations of the industry. It's not a personal memoir about my relationships with other broadcasters. Well, it feels pretty personal from where I'm sitting, Lorraine shot back. Debbie Watson tried once more to defuse the situation. Perhaps we could take a quick break and... No, Lorraine said sharply. We're not taking a break. Piers came here to talk, so let's talk. She turned back to Piers, her eyes blazing. Tell me something, Piers. When you wrote that book, when you wrote those words about morning television becoming irrelevant, did you stop for even 1 second to think about the people whose careers you were dismissing? Did you think about me? About Debbie? About Marcus? About the hundreds of people who work on shows like this? Of course I thought about the people, Piers said. But I also thought about the viewers, Lorraine. I thought about the people at home who are turning off their televisions because they're tired of celebrity gossip and cooking segments and fashion tips. They want substance. They want real journalism. So now you're saying we don't do real journalism? Lorraine said, her voice dangerously quiet. I'm saying the balance has shifted, Piers said carefully. And yes, I think shows like this could benefit from more hard-hitting content. Hard-hitting content, Lorraine repeated mockingly. Like what you do, I suppose. Like shouting at politicians and hanging up on guests who disagree with you? I engage with people, Piers said defensively. I ask tough questions. I don't just sit here and smile and nod while celebrities plug their latest projects. How dare you, Lorraine said, standing up from her chair. The audience gasped again. How dare you come onto my show, my set, and insult what I do? I have worked harder than you could ever imagine to build this program. I have earned the trust of millions of viewers who tune in every single morning. And you have the nerve to sit there and suggest that it's all meaningless fluff? Piers stood up as well, facing her. I never said it was meaningless. But you can't deny that morning television has changed. It's become softer, more celebrity-focused, less about news and more about entertainment. And what's wrong with entertainment? Lorraine demanded. What's wrong with giving people a break from all the doom and gloom? What's wrong with starting their day with something light and positive? Nothing's wrong with it, Piers said, but it shouldn't be the only thing you do. It's not the only thing we do, Lorraine practically screamed. We cover news stories. We interview important people. We talk about issues that matter. But we also know that our audience doesn't want to be lectured at 9 in the morning. They don't want to sit there and watch me interrogate a politician until they cry. They want balance. They want variety. Something you clearly don't understand. Marcus Hill nervously spoke up again. I think both of you make valid points about the current state of... Marcus, if you interrupt one more time, I will have you removed from this panel, Lorraine said without even glancing at him. Marcus's face went pale. He looked absolutely mortified. Debbie reached over and gently touched his arm in support, but she said nothing, clearly afraid of drawing Lorraine's wrath herself. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Piers said, gesturing to the panel. You're treating your own colleagues with contempt because you're so focused on attacking me. This isn't professional. This isn't how you treat guests or your team. Don't you dare lecture me about professionalism, Lorraine hissed. You, who have walked off more sets than anyone in television history. You, who threw a tantrum and quit your own show because someone criticized you. You want to talk about professionalism? I left that show because I was being asked to apologize for an opinion I stood by, Piers said. That's called having integrity. That's called being stubborn and egotistical, Lorraine countered. The studio was electric with tension now. The camera operators didn't know where to point their cameras. The audience sat frozen, watching what had become a full-blown argument. You know what I think? Lorraine continued, her voice dripping with disdain. I think you're jealous. I think you're jealous that I'm still on the air every morning, that I still have a loyal audience, that I still have a career in morning television while yours imploded. And so you write this bitter little book, trying to tear down everyone else to make yourself feel better. That's absurd, Piers said, but there was hurt in his eyes now. I'm not jealous of anyone. I'm doing perfectly fine. Thank you very much. Are you? Lorraine challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man desperately trying to stay relevant by criticizing everyone else. And from where I'm standing, Piers shot back, you look like a host who can't take any criticism without having a complete meltdown on live television. The audience audibly gasped at that. It was a direct hit, and everyone knew it. Lorraine's face turned red. Get out, she said quietly. What? Piers said. Get out of my studio, Lorraine repeated, louder this time. This interview is over. I don't want you here. You're kicking me off your show? Piers said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. Yes, I am, Lorraine said, because clearly you have no respect for me, for this show, or for what we do here. So I'm asking you to leave. Piers stared at her for a long moment. The entire studio held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Fine, Piers said finally. I'll leave, but not because you're asking me to. I'll leave because I don't want to be part of this circus anymore. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, and instead, I've been ambushed and attacked from the moment I sat down. He started to unclip his microphone, his hands shaking slightly with anger. You know what the saddest part about all of this is, Lorraine? He said, looking directly at her. I actually admired you. I thought you were one of the good ones. Someone who managed to stay genuine and kind despite decades in this cutthroat industry. But I was wrong. You're just as insecure and vindictive as everyone else. Don't you dare, Lorraine warned. But Piers continued. You couldn't handle a few observations in a book. Observations that weren't even specifically about you. And instead of having an adult conversation about it, you brought me on your show just to humiliate me. What does that say about you? It says I'm willing to confront people who talk behind others' backs, Lorraine shouted. I didn't talk behind your back, Piers shouted right back. I wrote a book that anyone can buy and read. That's not talking behind someone's back. That's expressing an opinion in a public forum. An opinion that was designed to hurt me. Everything isn't about you, Lorraine. The argument had reached a fever pitch. Debbie and Marcus looked absolutely terrified, sitting frozen in their seats. The audience was riveted, unable to look away from the spectacle. You want to know what I really think? Piers said, his voice cold now. I think you've been in this cushy morning show bubble for so long that you've forgotten what real journalism looks like. You've gotten so used to softball questions and celebrity interviews that the idea of someone questioning the value of what you do sends you into a rage. How dare you question my journalism credentials, Lorraine said, her voice shaking with fury. I have covered wars. I have interviewed presidents and prime ministers. I have broken major news stories. What have you done lately besides write a bitter book and complain about everyone else? I've maintained my integrity, Piers said simply. Something you seem to have lost. That was it. That was the moment when Lorraine completely lost control. Get out, she screamed, pointing toward the exit. Get out of my studio right now. I'm going, Piers said, finally getting his microphone unclipped. He tossed it onto the chair. Trust me, I have no interest in staying here 1 second longer than I have to. He started walking toward the exit, the cameras following him. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of the most famous journalists in Britain walked off the set. But Lorraine wasn't done. And don't bother coming back, she shouted after him. You're not welcome on this show ever again. Piers stopped and turned around, looking at her one last time. Don't worry, he said, his voice carrying across the studio. I wouldn't come back if you begged me. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces and an audience that couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Lorraine stood there, breathing heavily, her face still flushed with anger. Debbie and Marcus sat motionless, afraid to speak or move. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Lorraine seemed to realize that the cameras were still rolling, that the audience was still there, watching her. She tried to compose herself, smoothing down her jacket and taking a deep breath. Well, she said, her voice unsteady, that was certainly interesting. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't applaud. They just stared at her, many of them looking deeply uncomfortable. I think we need to take a break, Lorraine said to the cameras. We'll be right back after these messages. As soon as the cameras cut, the studio erupted into chaos. Producers rushed onto the set. Crew members huddled together whispering, and audience members started talking amongst themselves, processing what they had just seen. Debbie Watson finally spoke up, her voice quiet. Lorraine, that was... Don't, Lorraine cut her off. Just don't. She walked off the set, leaving Debbie and Marcus sitting there alone, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been a simple morning talk show interview. In the hallway backstage, Piers Morgan was already on his phone, no doubt calling his agent or his publisher or anyone who would listen to his side of the story. His face was still red with anger, but there was also something else there. Vindication, perhaps. Or maybe just sadness at how badly things had gone wrong. A production assistant approached him nervously. Mr. Morgan, I'm so sorry about what happened out there. That wasn't supposed to. It's not your fault, Piers said, cutting her off but not unkindly. Your boss has some serious issues she needs to work out. He gathered his coat and his copy of his book, which he had brought with him for the interview. Looking at it now, he couldn't help but shake his head. All of this over a book. Over a few observations about an industry they both loved. Back on the set, Lorraine had returned, trying to regain some semblance of control. But her hands were shaking, and her eyes looked suspiciously wet, like she might cry at any moment. "Are you okay?" Debbie asked carefully. "I'm fine," Lorraine said tersely. "Absolutely fine." But she wasn't fine. Everyone could see that. The mask had slipped, and what they had seen underneath was not the warm, friendly host they all knew and loved. It was someone bitter, someone angry, someone who couldn't handle criticism without lashing out. Marcus cleared his throat. "Should we maybe talk about what just happened? I mean, the audience saw everything. The viewers at home saw everything. We can't just pretend it didn't happen." "We're not going to talk about it," Lorraine said firmly. "When we come back from commercial, we're moving on to the next segment. We have that chef coming on to make Christmas cookies. We're going to do that segment, and we're going to act like everything is normal." "But Lorraine," Debbie started. "I said we're not talking about it," Lorraine snapped, her voice rising again. Debbie and Marcus exchanged worried glances, but said nothing more. They knew better than to push her when she was in this state. The floor manager gave them a countdown, 30 seconds until they were back on air. Lorraine checked her appearance in a small mirror, fixing her hair and forcing a smile onto her face. It looked painful, that smile. Forced and fake, and nothing like the genuine warmth she usually radiated. 10 seconds, the floor manager called out. Lorraine took one more deep breath, squared her shoulders, and looked at the camera. "And we're back," she said when they went live again, her voice unnaturally bright. "Well, that was certainly an exciting start to the show, but now we're going to lighten things up a bit with something delicious." The audience remained quiet. Nobody laughed at her attempt at a joke. Nobody smiled. They just sat there, still processing what they had witnessed, still trying to understand how their beloved Lorraine could have behaved that way. In the control room, the director was already fielding phone calls from network executives who had been watching the live broadcast. This was going to be a nightmare to deal with. The clips would be all over social media within the hour. The headlines would be brutal. But Lorraine kept going, pushing through the segment with the chef, laughing at his jokes, tasting his cookies, acting for all the world like nothing had happened. It was a masterclass in denial, in compartmentalization, in pretending that the previous 20 minutes simply hadn't occurred. Debbie and Marcus played along, because what else could they do? They smiled and nodded and made comments about the cookies, but their hearts weren't in it. How could they be? They had just watched their host verbally eviscerate a guest on live television. They had been snapped at and dismissed and treated like they didn't matter. And now they were expected to just carry on as if it were any other day. Meanwhile, in the backstage area, crew members were still talking about what had happened. Some of them were defending Lorraine, saying that Piers had been out of line with his book, that he deserved to be called out. But others were shocked by how Lorraine had handled it, by how unprofessional and hostile she had been. "I've never seen her like that," one camera operator said quietly. "In all the years I've worked here, I've never seen her lose it like that." "She was like a completely different person," another crew member agreed. "It was scary, honestly." One of the producers overheard them and quickly shushed them. "Keep it down. We don't need this spreading any more than it already has." But it was too late for that. The damage was done. The internet was already exploding with reactions. People were taking sides. Team Piers or Team Lorraine. But overwhelmingly, the consensus seemed to be that Lorraine had gone too far. That regardless of whatever Piers had written in his book, The way she had treated him on her own show was inexcusable. Back on the set, the show continued. More segments, more guests, more forced cheerfulness from Lorraine. But everyone could see the cracks. The way her smile would slip when she thought the cameras weren't on her. The way her voice would catch sometimes. Like she was fighting back tears or anger or both. Debbie tried to support her, jumping in with comments and questions to fill awkward silences. Marcus did the same, though he seemed more subdued now, clearly still stung by how Lorraine had treated him earlier. When the show finally ended, when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience filed out, Lorraine sat in her chair, staring at nothing. The studio crew began breaking down the set around her, but she didn't move. "Lorraine," Debbie said, gently, approaching her. "Are you okay?" "I need to be alone," Lorraine said, without looking at her. "Maybe we should talk about what happened," Debbie suggested carefully. "There's nothing to talk about," Lorraine said firmly. "Piers Morgan came on my show and disrespected me. I stood up for myself. End of story." "But the way you spoke to him," Debbie started. Lorraine finally looked at her, and her eyes were hard. "Are you saying I was wrong?" "I'm saying maybe there was a better way to handle it," Debbie said diplomatically. "I handled it exactly how it needed to be handled," Lorraine insisted. "He needed to know that he can't just write whatever he wants about people without consequences." "But Lorraine, he didn't even mention you by name in the book," Debbie pointed out gently. "He didn't have to," Lorraine said, her voice rising again. "Everyone knew who he meant. Everyone in this industry read that and knew he was talking about me." Debbie didn't know what to say to that. She could see that Lorraine was beyond reasoning with right now. Whatever had happened during that interview, whatever had triggered such an extreme reaction, it had tapped into something deeper. Some insecurity, or fear, or anger that had been building for a long time. "I'm going to my dressing room," Lorraine said, standing up abruptly. "I don't want to be disturbed." She walked off, leaving Debbie standing there alone. Marcus approached from the other side of the set. "That was intense," he said quietly. "That's an understatement," Debbie replied. They stood there together, watching as the crew continued to break down the set, both of them wondering what would happen next. Would there be consequences for Lorraine? Would Piers retaliate somehow? Would the network demand an apology? "I've never seen her like that," Marcus said. "In all the time I've been on this show, I've never seen her lose control like that." "Me neither," Debbie agreed. "It was like she became a different person." "Do you think she was right?" Marcus asked. "About Piers, I mean. Do you think he was deliberately trying to hurt her with what he wrote?" Debbie thought about that for a moment. "I think Piers was writing what he believed to be true about the industry. Whether he meant to hurt Lorraine specifically, I don't know, but I do know that the way she handled it today was wrong. You don't ambush a guest like that. You don't invite someone onto your show just to attack them." "She definitely seemed like she had been planning that confrontation," Marcus agreed, "like she had been waiting for him to come on so she could let him have it." "Which makes it even worse," Debbie said. "If she was that angry, she shouldn't have invited him on at all. Or she should have talked to him privately, off camera, not turned it into a public spectacle." They both fell silent, thinking about what they had witnessed and what it meant for the show going forward. Would viewers lose respect for Lorraine after seeing her behave that way? Would guests be afraid to come on now, worried that they might be the next target of her wrath? In her dressing room, Lorraine sat in front of her mirror, staring at her own reflection. Her makeup was smudged now, her hair messed up from running her hands through it repeatedly. She looked tired. She looked old. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself cry. She cried for the career she had built so carefully over decades. She cried for the reputation she might have just destroyed in 20 minutes of uncontrolled rage. She cried because deep down, she knew that Debbie was right. There had been a better way to handle this. A professional way. A way that didn't involve screaming at a guest on live television. But in that moment, when Piers had walked onto her set with his book and his opinions and his criticism, something in her had snapped. All the years of working harder than anyone else, of proving herself over and over again, of dealing with the constant pressure to maintain ratings and relevance in an industry that was always looking for the next young thing to replace you with. It had all come pouring out in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. There was a knock on her dressing room door. "Go away!" Lorraine called out. "Lorraine, it's Patricia," came the voice of her executive producer. "We need to talk." Lorraine wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together. She knew this conversation was coming. She opened the door. Patricia looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lorraine lied. "We need to discuss what happened out there," Patricia said, coming into the room and closing the door behind her. "I know," Lorraine said quietly. "The network has been calling non-stop," Patricia continued. "They want to know what we're going to do about this. The clip is already all over social media. It's trending on Twitter. People are calling for you to apologize." "I'm not apologizing," Lorraine said firmly. "I won't apologize for defending myself." "Lorraine, you attacked a guest on your own show," Patricia said carefully. "You kicked him off set. You yelled at your own panel members. This isn't just about defending yourself. This is about how you conducted yourself as a professional." "He insulted me in his book," Lorraine protested. "Maybe he did," Patricia conceded. "But that doesn't give you the right to treat him the way you did. You know that." Lorraine sat down heavily on her couch. "I know," she admitted quietly. "I know I went too far. But when I saw him sitting there, so smug and confident, acting like he hadn't just torn down everything I've worked for, I just couldn't help myself." "You need to issue a statement," Patricia said gently. "Something acknowledging that you could have handled the situation better." "They want me to grovel," Lorraine said bitterly. "They want you to take responsibility," Patricia corrected. "There's a difference." Lorraine knew she was right. She knew that what had happened today would follow her for the rest of her career if she didn't address it properly. But the thought of admitting she was wrong, of apologizing to Piers Morgan of all people, made her stomach turn. "I'll think about it," was all she said. Patricia nodded, understanding that was all she was going to get for now. "Get some rest, Lorraine. We'll talk more tomorrow." After Patricia left, Lorraine sat alone in her dressing room, surrounded by the photos and awards and memories of a career that suddenly felt very fragile. She thought about Piers, probably at home now, fielding interview requests and planning his response. She thought about her panel members, who she had treated so poorly. She thought about the audience, who had watched her lose control. Most of all, she thought about tomorrow, about having to come back to this studio, to face the cameras and the questions and the judgment, about having to rebuild the trust and goodwill that she had destroyed in one moment of unchecked anger. It was going to be a long road back from this, if there even was a road back at all.